Hello and welcome to all of my nerd-a-fews, both those coming back and those here for the first time. I am your cool Uncle Marissa, and today we're going to be talking about, once again, my favorite compact, portable gaming device. That's right, this little mother flipper, the Game Boy Advance SP. If you watched a couple of videos back, we talked about the difference between the FunnyPlaying version 2 IPS screen and the AGS 101. Something that came up a lot in the comments and in my mind, and the reason that it took me so long to be able to get an AGS 101 was the availability, the accessibility, and the cost of an AGS 101. And it seems in a move that is very catering to Uncle Marissa, FunnyPlaying has been releasing a lot of great screens that capture that retro look, from the Game Boy Advance ITA screens, which I absolutely love, and I will definitely do a video showcasing that too, to the FunnyPlaying version 3 IPS screen. This screen has a couple of retro modes. So that just means that it overlays with things like scan lines to make it look less smooth, less blended and crisp and modern. Now they do also have an ITA screen that they released for the Game Boy Advance SP, except you have to use a very specific aftermarket shell for that, and as we're going to discover in this video, aftermarket shells are not really, unfortunately, the best. Now, before we dive in, please use the chapter function. I put the timestamps in the description for a reason, so that you can jump around the video and only watch the parts that you're interested in or are useful to you. Because in this video, I'm going to be covering quite a bit of ground. I am going to be covering the aftermarket shell, installing the FunnyPlaying version 3, as well as comparing the FunnyPlaying version 3 screen with the AGS 101 and the version 2 IPS screen. So first I want to discuss my artistic vision here. I did not have an OEM Game Boy shell for this, and that's great because I got to try my hand at, for the first time, customizing a Game Boy Advance SP. So I'm sure many of you are aware there were a lot of limited edition consoles Nintendo put out, and there were a lot of Game Boy Advance SPs and Advance that were Pokemon Center exclusives. Exclusive to Pokemon Center Japan was this very cute Venusaur Game Boy Advance, as well as the even more elusive Torchic Game Boy Advance SP. Now, what I really like about the Venusaur one is the outline of the character, both on the top of the SP as well as on the bottom right of the inside. What I like about the Torchic one is Torchic's like one of my favorite Pokemon, and it's a very subtle image. But here's the problem with both of them. It's almost impossible, I would venture to say, to find these in good condition. And the Torchic one, I've seen ones where people are claiming this is the Torchic SP, and mine eyes do not behold a Torchic because it's gone. It's been rubbed off. The wear and color changes. So I decided to make my own. I thought I would match it to my oranges and cream GameCube. Now this was a lot of work. At first I wanted to maybe use any sort of silhouette of Torchic, but I was really stuck on the cute little walking motion Torchic that's on the original Torchic SP. I tracked down the best photos of this console that I could and traced them and eventually vectorized them. I then cut that using my Cameo 4 cutting machine onto vinyl. I used the vinyl as a stencil. I spray painted over it, and then just for kicks and as a sort of homage to the Venusaur version, I stuck the vinyl cutout from the middle of Torchic onto the bottom right of my Game Boy Advance SP. This was my first time using glossy coat, and after polishing it, I feel like maybe it's a little too shiny. So I might redo the bottom half. Anyway, I'm not going to do a tutorial on making your own shell or anything. I just wanted to share that because I'm happy with how it came out, and I really love customizing my consoles. So yeah, let's get to the meat and bones of this. Let's go ahead and do a how-to on how to install the FunnyPlaying version 3 IPS screen. Now, I will not be doing comprehensive assembly reassembly on this video because I already did that in my last video. So if you need that, either check out my last video or pull up a guide from iFixit. I swear those people are on par with Wikipedia editors. But I will be filming parts of the assembly that are different when using an aftermarket shell, since my last disassembly reassembly video was with 2 OEM shells. All right, let's go. Since my shell is not IPS ready, we are going to start by trimming the top half. The primary part you need to trim is on the side where the hinge is, and do our cut right before the second nub. So first I'm going to score the plastic with a sharp X-Acto knife. And once you've gone over the plastic a few times with the knife, you can grab a pair of wire cutters. It's nice to have a dedicated pair for plastic trimming, and start making cuts. It's good to make multiple cuts across the area so that you can work in smaller pieces. There's not a ton to explain here, but it's really helpful if you make these back and forth motions to help loosen the bits. And it doesn't have to be perfect the first round. You just want to get some big chunks out in a sort of rough way, and we'll work on cleaning it up as we go. And now that we've gotten the bigger pieces out of the way, we can be more precise and put our flush cutters even more flush to the base of the plastic. Okay, so now that we've made that rough cut and cleaned it up a bit, I just wanted to check to make sure that the screen fits well, as the trim guide on Retromodding that I was following is for the version 2. Now I was a little nervous about that ribbon cable, so I decided to cut up to right before the very top nub. That ribbon cable does fold back, but you don't have to do this. I was just nervous. Also, I want to note that as you can see, I personally did trim down the inner border on the right side. You don't have to do that. If you do that, you are able to put the foam backing on the screen to provide support on that side. If you don't do that, the foam backing will probably provide too much pressure on your screen and cause some issues, so you can go without the foam backing. So now it's time to polish up our work. For this, you'll need a file. We're going to file down as much as we can. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect because some parts are still going to be raised, but filing down the parts that are cut pretty flush will help us have more access to the parts that are still raised with the flush cutters. So this is going to be a bit of a back and forth journey. So now that I've filed half of it, I can go back in and do some more cleanup with the flush cutters. I'm using the thin side of the file to file down the little nubs on the side. And let's give that screen another go, make sure everything is nice and even. And if you're happy, you can go ahead and rinse out that top section to get all the dust out. Just make sure it's dry before you reassemble. And now it is time to get our hinges from our donor console. You can buy aftermarket hinges, but these OEM ones are highly recommended because I've never used aftermarket hinges, but apparently they're not that great. This is hard. You need to push them out with a screwdriver or whatever your mind thinks of. I think there's actually 3D printable tools out there. I don't have a 3D printer. And so I'm doing it off screen against my knee, and that turns out really well for me because I get them. Only one of them flies to the ground. And then I somehow in the middle of it all tear up my thumb. So that's cool. Be careful. But good news. When I went to get a Band-Aid, I realized my girlfriend had gotten us Hello Kitty Band-Aids. If you're planning on changing the color of the hinge covers, you just have to pop them off in a sort of pulling motion, and I'm gonna put on the new ones. You can't really see it in the video, but the white plastic of the hinge has a raised area. And so you want the raised area to be at the bottom. So you put it over the area where it's not raised. One of the aftermarket issues I've encountered, one of many, is that these covers have a lot of stray plastic sticking out. So I tried to cut some of it off as best as I could. And then it's time to install the hinges. Align the hinge holes. I don't know what to call them. And the black one is on the left. The white one goes on the right. Now for this, I used please don't get upset with me, I used a rubber mallet gently to get them both in. Just a couple of taps. And now for the star of the show, our FunnyPlaying Game Boy Advance SP IPS screen version 3, and how to install that. The screen comes in 3 major pieces. There's the screen itself, the ribbon cable, and a black piece of foam. It also comes with another piece of foam, which you can apply to the back. And it comes with the wire that you need to solder. Before you do anything, just test the screen. Insert the screen's ribbon cable into the board, and then insert that ribbon cable right there with the gold contacts facing up into the SP board. Now, my video cut out for some reason, but I trust you know how to test it. Once it works, which mine did, you can take off the adhesive on the back of the ribbon cable board and stick it on the back of the screen, and I use some Kapton tape for extra protection. Then you can sit the screen into the frame and roll our ribbon cable into the hinges. And here you want to install the cover so that we don't have to deal with the ribbon cable popping out or anything. We want to just keep it stable. Next, I'm going to put the top cover on. There is a piece of foam and it just fits right in. Go ahead and see how that fits for you. For me, the part where the board is, it's raising it too high, so it's not able to close. But it works on the other side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it around the ribbon cable board. And as you can see, that was a good fit. Like I said in my last SP video, when you want to test it, only put in a few screws at a time. And for this aftermarket shell, do not use the included screws. They are awful. Use your OEM screws if you have them. Once you've popped in all of your buttons and membranes and that lovely speaker, we can install our screen onto our motherboard. The ribbon cable should be the correct way up with the gold contacts up, facing up. If you have rolled your ribbon cable only once, which is the only physically permissible amount of times to roll it up. Okay, now let's get soldering. For really small projects like this, I love my Chip Quick Flux pen. It's not messy and it works. We're going to be soldering from the gold pad on the ribbon to Q12B, which is the point that controls brightness. All right, so I've got my iron at 340 and I am going to tin the gold circular pad on the ribbon cable as well as point Q12B. Tinning just means adding a bit of solder. I'm also going to make sure I tin both ends of the wire. Sometimes wires that come with these kits are pre-tinned, but it never hurts to just do it yourself, because if it's not, now it is. If it is, now it is again. And then I'm going to solder the wire first to the ribbon cable and then to the board. To solder to the board, you can use your hands, you can use tweezers, you can use helping hands, whatever works for you. And once the wire is soldered, we are back to my favorite roll, Kapton tape. And I'm just gonna put a little bit over the point with the motherboard and a little bit on the ribbon cable. Of course, this protects from interference, but when you're soldering wires to such tiny points, it also helps give a little bit more support to the wire to make sure it doesn't pop off if you accidentally pull something the wrong way. It's also just a nice little blanket, like, welcome. Now let's tuck you in. And then I can go on to closing everything up. I won't be showing that. This isn't a reassembly video. You can check out my last video for that. One thing that I will note, since this is an aftermarket shell, you need to find this little square nut and put it right here before you close anything up. This is going to be where the screw from the battery cover will thread itself. So now that we're confident that we don't want to take this apart again in the immediate future, we can put the bumpers in. Now, I didn't realize that the shell came with bumpers, so I also ordered a pair of extra bumpers from Retro Modding, and these ones are adhesive and truer to color, I think, to the SP bumpers, which tend to be a duller color than the shell. The ones that came with it do not have any adhesive, but more on that later. And of course, I had to share probably the most satisfying part with you guys, putting on that Nintendo sticker. It really brings it all together. And I wanted to do such a satisfying peel of the protective cover, but yeah. The version 3 has 8 brightness levels, which is 2 more than the prior version. The viewing angles are beautiful, which is as to be expected. There's also several color palettes. There's the regular, slightly brighter, black and white, and DMG green. Now for the real star of the show, we have 3 display modes. The first one is standard. It's what you see when you look at an IPS screen. The second one is anti-aliasing, and the third one is our favorite, the retro display, and that gives you those beautiful lines on the screen, and it's gorgeous. There's also this new feature, FRM, which helps with frame smoothing, and that helps with ghosting. You can't really see it in this game, but in faster paced games, riding your bike in Pokemon games, that's where it will really shine. Okay, so we're back, and I mean, my verdict on this screen itself, I love it. It's amazing. I'm so glad that we have this available because we can finally get that retro look without having to scour the universe for an affordable and good condition AGS 101, and a lot of AGS 101s are starting to fail. They're old. It's an amazing option to have, and it's a very easy install. I really like that all of the on-screen options can be controlled with the brightness control, because with the Game Boy Advance, for example, you have to use the start, select, A, B combos, and if you're trying to adjust something in the middle of a game, you start making inputs into the game, and that's just really irritating. I would like to point out 2 things that are not perfect with the screen. I give the display 10 out of 10, but with the screen, FunnyPlaying consistently does this thing where the logo on the Game Boy Advance SP lens is terrible. Why does the SP look like that? And then I don't know if you can tell, but there is a line. It's not a scratch. I don't know if it's the laminate having some distance from the display, but there's no light leak. But I have spoken to the folks at Retro Modding, and I will update with what it means, because it's not ideal. If we're talking about the aftermarket shell, here is all the reasons that I now understand why we should not use an aftermarket shell. What is going on with that? Like, oh, so the creaking's gotten better. The creaking's actually gotten better. I don't want to lie to you. I very likely might open this and use some silicone grease on the hinges. If you are going to lubricate it, make sure you use silicone grease, because that's the plastic friendly version. Another thing, it doesn't fully close. There's a gap. Compare that to the OEM shell. It's not ideal. Even the seams, they're not held together perfectly. That doesn't bother me as much, because that's a very common aftermarket shell issue for Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, all of them. The seams are always a little off, and it's fine. But with this one, it's the seam on the back hinge. It's a little lifted and it won't go down. I tried, I even reassembled it. It won't go down. Other things to note. Oh my God, do not use the screws that come with it. They are domed for some reason, and they stripped really quickly. They were made of, I don't know, Play-Doh. Use your OEM screws. If you don't have them, go online, try to find some screws. Some other issues, the bumpers that I had bought that were adhesive, they sunk super deep and did not function as bumpers. I bought those because I wasn't aware that the shell came with bumpers. I wasn't aware the shell came with a lot of things. So I took those out and I tried the bumpers that came with it. The bumpers that came with it did not have an adhesive, and I now understand why. They are supposed to just sit in there and they don't fall out, which is nice. But the color is a little off. The color is the same color as the shell as opposed to being slightly duller, but I would rather have better bumpers and better protection than OEM colored bumpers. Also, the shell just feels really light. I think it is a cheaper plastic. When I wiped it down with isopropyl alcohol, the alcohol caused it to streak, which usually doesn't happen. The shell did come with the buttons. That was a surprise. That was nice. But also now I have 2 sets of SP buttons I don't know what to do with. I'd always heard that aftermarket SP buttons, they can be tricky, but these are actually much better than I thought they would be. They feel fine. They don't necessarily feel like as precise. They do feel mushier than the original SP buttons, but given how tactile SP buttons already are, it's not as awful as when you get a bad set of Game Boy Advance buttons. Here's a quick sound test. This is OEM, A, B, and here are the aftermarket. Hear that? It sounds a bit more hollow. The OEM D-pad is also, each directional button is a bit raised. It's not as raised on the aftermarket buttons. Aftermarket. That might be more of a tactile feeling than an aural recognition, but there's definitely less travel distance on the aftermarket. These ones are just nitpicky. My biggest annoyance, I have to say, with all of it is the hinge issue, because I'm using the OEM hinges. I'm not using aftermarket hinges, and I do not love that the top of the shell does not sit very well. But none of this is rendering it unplayable. Nothing cracked while I was working with it, and hopefully will not crack in the future. So aftermarket shell, I think, not the best idea if you can get an OEM one. But overall, I hope you found this video to be helpful. I really love the SP. It's such a wonderful console, and I think that despite all of my gripes, I think it came out okay. Ultimately, this makes a really good, I'm gonna take this out and play it on the go shell, because it's not a hard to find color. If I drop it, if it gets dirty, you know, it's a bummer because I worked hard on it, but that's okay. As always, thank you so much for joining me and working on this build. I hope that this video was helpful. Let me know what you think now that you've seen all three of these screens compared side by side. Are you going to pick up this new display? But all that being said, I am your cool Uncle Marissa, and I hope you'll come over and visit soon. Bye bye. Hey guys, this is the future Uncle Marissa, and I am older, wiser, and cooler, and I have a new update. So the line on my display was getting bigger, and it was very clearly the glue coming off between the laminated lens and the display itself. The wonderful folks at Retro Modding Express shipped me a new display, and it is beautiful now. No issues with it. It looks great. The other screen also was a little tilted, you might have noticed, and this one, the alignment is perfect as well. So thank you so much, Retro Modding, for the speedy replacement. And at this point, I can wholeheartedly recommend this display because there's no more issues. Also, my shell is no longer creaking. Hopefully it doesn't come back, but I imagine it's just the plastic has settled.